The room was steeped in an almost ethereal glow, the warm light of vintage sconces casting flickering shadows onto the textured wallpaper. Johnny Depp sat at a heavy wooden table, his fingers interlaced and his expression contemplative. His eyes, lined with a faint hint of exhaustion, wandered to the shadow cast on the wall behind him. It was a silhouette of himself, his ever-present shadow, dark and shapeless, yet undeniably tied to him. It was in this quiet moment, amidst the grandeur of a room filled with antique decor, that Johnny began to think about what the shadow really represented. For years, he had carried the weight of fame, fortune, and public scrutiny. The world saw him as larger than life, an enigma wrapped in charisma and talent. But deep down, there was a part of him he felt he had lost or perhaps had never truly found. The shadow seemed to whisper, though no words were spoken. It was a reflection of his past, his fears, and the parts of himself he had hidden away. He reached for the glass of whiskey on the table, the amber liquid reflecting the light like liquid gold, and took a slow sip. Tonight, he resolved, he would begin to understand the shadow, to find the pieces of himself he had neglected. Johnny's thoughts drifted back to his childhood. Growing up in Owensboro, Kentucky, he had always been a dreamer. As a boy, he would spend hours sketching strange characters, dreaming of worlds far removed from the quiet streets of his hometown. His imagination was his refuge, a place where he could escape the chaos of his tumultuous family life. He remembered one particular evening when he had first noticed his shadow as something more than just a trick of light. It was a summer evening, and he had been playing in the backyard, a flashlight in hand. The beam of light had caught his shadow on the wall of the house, and young Johnny had been mesmerized by the way it mimicked his every move. It was as if it were alive, a silent companion that understood him in ways no one else could. But as Johnny grew older, that childlike fascination gave way to a sense of disconnection. The world's expectations began to weigh heavily on him. The shadow, once a source of wonder, became a reminder of the parts of himself he could no longer see. The glitz and glamour of Hollywood were intoxicating, but they came with a price. Johnny had risen to fame quickly, his unique charm and undeniable talent catapulting him into the spotlight. He became a household name, adored by fans worldwide. Yet amidst the flashing cameras and red carpets, he often felt like he was playing a character, even when the cameras weren't rolling. He thought of the roles he had played, iconic characters that had defined his career and in many ways his identity. Jack Sparrow, Edward Scissorhands, and so many others. Each role had left a mark on him, but sometimes he wondered if he had lost himself in the process. Who was Johnny Depp without the characters, without the costumes and makeup? Was he simply a collection of roles, or was there something deeper within? The shadow on the wall seemed to grow darker as these thoughts swirled in his mind. It was as if it were absorbing his doubts and fears, reflecting the inner turmoil he tried so hard to suppress. One day during a break from filming, Johnny decided to take a trip back to Owensboro. It had been years since he'd last visited, and he felt an inexplicable pull to return to his roots. The small town was largely unchanged, its quiet streets and friendly faces a stark contrast to the chaos of Hollywood. He found himself standing in front of his childhood home, the old house now worn with age. Memories flooded back as he walked through the neighborhood, the sights and sounds triggering flashes of his younger self. He visited the local diner where he used to sit with his sketchbook, dreaming of a life beyond the town's borders. It was in this nostalgic setting that Johnny felt a flicker of connection to his past. He realized that the shadow he sought to understand wasn't just a part of his present, but was rooted in the experiences and dreams of his younger self. As he delved deeper into his journey of self-discovery, Johnny began seeking out conversations with people who had known him before the fame. He met with an old high school teacher who had once encouraged his artistic pursuits. Their conversation was filled with warmth and laughter, but also with poignant reflections on how far he had come and what he might have left behind. He also reconnected with a childhood friend who had always believed in his potential. They spoke about the wild dreams they'd shared as kids and the paths their lives had taken. Through these interactions, Johnny began to piece together a clearer picture of himself. The shadow, once an elusive and intimidating presence, started to feel more like a guide, a reminder of the boy he once was and the man he had become. While exploring a local art gallery, Johnny encountered a mysterious artist whose work seemed to resonate deeply with him. The artist, an older man, with a calm demeanor and piercing eyes, introduced himself as Elias. They struck up a conversation, and Johnny found himself opening up about his struggles and his quest to understand his shadow. Elias listened intently before sharing his own story of self-discovery. He spoke about the importance of embracing every part of oneself, the light and the dark, the triumphs and the failures. He challenged Johnny to confront his fears head-on, to face the shadow not as an adversary, but as an integral part of his being. Back in the vintage room, Johnny sat once more at the heavy wooden table. The shadow on the wall was still there, but it no longer felt intimidating. Instead, it felt like a companion, a silent witness to his journey. He took a deep breath and allowed himself to confront the doubts and fears that had plagued him. He thought about the mistakes he had made, the relationships he had lost, and the parts of himself he had hidden away. And in that moment, he felt a sense of peace. The shadow was not his enemy, it was a part of him, a reflection of his humanity. As the first light of dawn filtered through the windows, Johnny's face was illuminated with a newfound sense of clarity. The room, once filled with flickering shadows, now felt warm and inviting. He stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the world with a renewed sense of purpose. The journey to find his shadow had been a journey to find himself, and though it was not the end of his story, it was a new beginning. He smiled, a quiet but genuine expression of contentment, and whispered, "The shadow I was searching for was never lost. It was always right beside me." Johnny found himself returning to his artistic roots, inspired by the journey he had undertaken. In a quiet studio surrounded by brushes, paints, and blank canvases, he began to channel his thoughts and feelings into art. His creations were vivid and raw, reflecting the balance of light and dark that he had come to accept within himself. Elias visited one day to see Johnny's work. "Your art," Elias said with a smile, "is a mirror of your soul. It speaks of your journey and your truth." Johnny realized that creativity had always been his sanctuary, a place where he could explore his inner world without fear. The shadow, once a source of uncertainty, now guided his hand, adding depth to every stroke and shade to every color. Years later, Johnny stood on the stage of an intimate theater, presenting his first art exhibition. The room was filled with people, but it was the silent presence of the shadow on the wall that comforted him the most. It stood there, unassuming yet profound, a reminder of his journey. In his speech, Johnny said, "The shadows we fear are often the parts of ourselves we have yet to understand. Embracing them is not a sign of weakness, but of strength. This collection is my story, told not in words or film, but in color and light." The audience applauded, but Johnny's gaze remained on the shadow. He no longer saw it as separate from himself. It was a part of his legacy, a testament to the journey of self-discovery that had shaped him. Johnny's story is a reminder that self-discovery is a lifelong journey. To embrace every part of oneself, the light and the dark, is to truly understand who we are. And in that understanding, we find peace.